Bonjour, guys. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Clay. Clay has recently passed his FE exam and he's agreed to share his experience with us. Now, we're going to be covering a couple topics, and so I'm really excited about this. With that, thank you so much, Clay, for joining us and for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a pleasure.
no problem. Okay, let's start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself. What did you major in? When did you graduate? And what kind of student were you in college?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like I kind of said before, my situation may be a little bit different than some others because I did not actually complete a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. I was an applied. My background is applied math and computer science, with another minor in technical geography. I did start in civil engineering. I went to the University of New Mexico, where I was actually a student athlete. I skied for the University of New Mexico, and I was a cyclist, a bike racer back in the '90s. So it's been a while. But I graduated in '94, and right out of college, I was busy with sports and everything. So I kind of that was right at the beginning of being able to do work through the internet. And so I was a computer programmer, and I made applications for engineering firms, to calculate hydraulic problems. So we would calculate drainage, we would calculate closed conduit hydraulics. We even did traffic level of service type problems. So I was exposed to it and I was familiar with it just through that. And I had to do a lot of self study in those next 5 years working for that first company that I worked for. But I didn't graduate with a degree in civil engineering. It was in math, which actually ended up serving me well on the FE, even though it's been a really long time
Yeah.
since I graduated. But recently I graduated also from the University of New Mexico with a master's of construction management through the Department of Civil Engineering. And that kind of made me realize I was like, you know what, kind of half technical, half more project management and construction law and things like that.
Mhm.
So that made me realize, you know what, I need to go and take the PE. As my organization changes and people are retiring, I realized that this is something I can do and it's something that will be a benefit for my organization and for me. And so I decided to start focusing on studying for it and filling in the gaps in areas that I didn't really have a lot of exposure. I was pretty aware because I've been designing projects and managing construction projects now for 20 years. So I now work for a municipal utility here in New Mexico. And so we do our own engineering work. We don't really consult out. So we have wells, we have two wastewater treatment plants. We actually own two hydroelectric plants on the rivers here in New Mexico. So I'm exposed to a lot. My experience is really what helped me to get to where I am. But then I had to really buckle down and study.
Yeah.
And so that's why I decided to take the FE. Actually, I was studying to take the PE, but here in New Mexico, they have a pretty strict statute about what types of education you have to be able to sit for the PE. And I was actually denied. My application was denied. And that was based on the fact that they start the clock right after you have graduated from an engineering program. And so here I was ready to go for the PE, but I had to suddenly switch gears and start studying for the FE. So that's why I went ahead and did that so that the next step and I won't get denied the next time. So that's where I am.
Wow, that's really cool and interesting background. It's very different, I think, than most civil engineering students who go ahead and take their FE. For UPE, usually the FE is a requirement, I think, for most states. And also, when you're gonna study for UPE, all the material or some of the material that you learned in the FE is going to help you with UPE as well. So
Sure.
yeah, so that's gonna be like a nice refresher kind of a thing.
I think in a lot of states you can actually get the FE waiver if you work. I think with a bachelor's degree, it's like 12 years under the direct supervision of a PE,
I see.
and with a master's degree, it's 6 years.
Okay,
But all of that is cut in half if
I
you
see.
do the FE.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
that's how most states work.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess I was gonna ask why did you take the FE or is it a requirement by your job? But I guess you answered that you kind of just want to take it to further your career and so that you can get your PE as well.
Right. So I'm technically a project manager. Of course, you can't be an engineer unless you pass the PE. So that's
Yeah.
a very important point. You have to pass I mean, you really cannot consider yourself an engineer until you pass the PE. That's why.
Okay, so now let's jumping into scheduling. How many months before the FE exam you begin studying?
So I graduated from my master's program in December of 2018, and I think I gave myself about a month of a break. And so in last this January of 2019, I kind of started, I really paced myself out. I didn't try to cram it all in a short amount of time. And so I just started going over reviewing material, starting to take on some of the easier problems. I wasn't doing the more involved ones yet, and I just started going through everything. I think I started with the structural stuff first because that
I
was going to
see.
take the longest. A lot of construction type problems, end area measurements, things like that that weren't so difficult. And then I started going through the traffic and highway construction problems. And then I just started building into getting in because of course, the geotechnical and some of the hydraulic stuff is pretty involved. So I
Sure.
just took my time and went all summer, and I never really let off. I never let any gaps. I never took big gaps of time.
I see.
I just kept doing it a little bit at a time, and then in the last, especially since August, I started to really pick up the pace.
I see. Okay, so on average, like how many hours did you study per week?
I would say at first it was like 2 hours per day, and
Okay.
it was on average 6 or 7 days a week. So it was like 12 to 14 hours every single week. If I wasn't and it wasn't all problem. I wasn't sitting there working problems that whole time. I was reviewing videos and I was reading a lot of the background material, and then I would dedicate some of the nights to just doing problems.
I
And
see.
maybe I would wake up in the morning. I'd be like, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going to get up, and while I eat breakfast and have coffee, I'm going to work this problem out. One of the big things that I eat that this is probably going to be for everybody is just being able to have the discipline to put aside all of the electronics. You just have to wean yourself off of looking at online media and doing all of that online stuff. You have to go back to pencil and paper and just getting used to going through your reference materials and just doing that and not being distracted by cell phone and the I tablet and everything. It's just something that you got to put yourself into that kind of mindset to not be distracted.
Yeah.
That's something that's I think is important.
I totally agree with that. I think studying with your phone on, even though like you might not get messages, that can like just mentally, it doesn't help you to stay
Absolutely.
clear and focus. You keep
Right.
checking your phone every second. Did I get a message? I think putting your phone away, like very far from you while you're studying, I think it's really important. So yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely agree
it,
with
you it and I'm gonna just say it. It is an absolute necessity to put it away.
that.
I
Yeah,
think that probably is now a new problem, and it
yeah.
distracts people enough that I think it probably is affecting the pass rate a little bit.
And so as your exam got closer, did you increase your time for studying?
Yeah, and in fact, so to go back to what was happening, I was getting ready for the PE, and so I was working PE style problems, which they're these were the same. I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely on the FE, I had problems that would have been on a PE. So it's good to kind of take that point of view. But when I found out that I wasn't going to be able to take the PE, I found that out in late August, and so I sat there going, well, what am I going to do? And so I actually called our board of professional licensure here in New Mexico, and I started to talk to them about it, and they said, well, you really what you could do is go ahead and take the FE and get your EIT, and I'm in my 40s, so now I've been working where I'm working. I've been at my organization for going on 20 years now, and so here I am now.
Yeah.
I'm going to be an EIT, but I'm already preparing to take the PE next year. So it'll still work out. But so I said, okay, I'll go through that. And I looked at it, I said, well, now I have to take the FE, which presented me with a new set of challenges because now I had to go back and you have to get all of make sure that you are ready for all the math and statistics and chemistry and all of that kind of stuff that won't necessarily be on the PE, in detail. So the other big thing is on the PE, a lot of the problems are in English units. There's not a lot of SI metric unit type problems, and the FE has a lot of, I would say, more than half were in metric. So that was something to get caught up on as well. So I had to really, and this is where I had to totally shift gears and start working FE style problems. And the videos that you had, Kenza, helped me a lot because you were working them out in SI units, and so I found that to be very helpful. And I gained enough comfort with it that it wasn't a problem. But I see why they do it because you can definitely start to memorize certain styles of problems
Yeah.
within one type of units. And so when they did that, it made you go back and really make sure that you were 100% clear on the concepts when it was in a different style of units.
Okay, great. The next thing I was hoping we could talk about is your preparation. Now, run me through a typical week of studying for the FE exam. Like, did you set a time of studying? Did you study like in the morning or just the evening or maybe during lunchtime? Like, what was it like?
Right. So because, the material is heavy and I realize it's difficult and you have to be tough to do this. I mean, you have to be disciplined and really buckle down and focus. So I would set aside blocks of time where and even if it was 1 hour before work. So I would get up, do it, have my morning routine, set down, and even if it was an hour, it's like, okay, in the morning I will read and I will look over what it is I'm going to do, at when I have a little bit of time at noon and when I'm going to study tonight 2 to 3 hours. And so I get prepared for it and I started thinking about it during the day, and then I had my day and I would take time. I still, made sure I stayed in shape and all of that. So that's another thing, is make sure that you do the things that you need to do for your health, because sitting down and letting your back get sore, or eating junk food and stuff while you're doing all that, you got to take care of yourself because the test it's physically demanding as well as mentally. So, I made sure that I got out for a run or rode my bike or something. And then I came and I was ready every evening. And I have kids. So, and I mean, luckily my wife was very supportive and my kids understood what was going on. But there were some nights where I had to get them, okay, guys, you need to get going to bed so I can start doing this. And so, I had to rush them off, but you just had to balance it a little bit. This last month, I increased the amount of time. So I was going to bed late some of the nights, but I'd get caught up, after 2 or 3 nights, I'd kind of take an easier night. And so you have to do that. You have to reward yourself for having a good, it's like, man, I really got something out of that day of studying. So I'm going to take my kids to the movie or spend a little more time, go on a mountain bike ride or something. So if you put yourself kind of on a reward program, it's amazing how helpful that was.
Yeah. So it seems like you have a really busy schedule. You have a lot on your plate, but you're also trying to, at the same time, make sure you take care of yourself, like eating healthy, staying like active, because that's going to affect your mental state as well, and like the way how you process information and learning the FE. And then you also, what I really liked about your schedule is that you make sure that you don't burn out. So right before you burn out, you go, okay, I'm gonna reward
Yes.
myself, go out, take my kids out, and I think that's really important to have that kind of a balanced life. Yeah,
Yeah, you have to
yeah,
strike a balance,
yeah,
because if you just obsess about it, and then what happens is your mind becomes it's no longer focused and clear. So
yeah,
you have to clear it. And if you there were some days where I was like, I can't, I just can't today. And there were some of those days in there. They got it, but once I got into the routine and I started to feel more confident, I actually had fewer of those days. But early on, there were a lot of those days where self doubt, fatigue, things like that kind of
Yeah.
crept in. But you just take a little bit of time, refocus, start over, work some problems that help your confidence, and then get back to the part that you got stumped on. And then it was like, I was like, I don't know why I was having so much trouble with that. And yeah, that helped. And then working in the videos helped too, because then it was like, that's what I did, or that's what I didn't do, that helped too.
So at the beginning, because I think the start is always the hardest in anything, right? To get that
Mhm.
momentum going, to get that start, it's always scary for
Right.
us because we don't know how much energy it requires or what to expect. And like you said, we get all these negative thoughts. And the way you fought it is that you would keep going. You didn't stop or give up or stop studying for like weeks. You kept going and you would
Right.
just try to work on the problems that would help you confident so that way you can keep going, and then the challenges or the problems you struggled with, you would look at it in a different way, like look up YouTube videos, see how you can figure it out, stuff like that. That's really cool.
Exactly.
That's very cool. Thank you for sharing that. That was actually awesome. Now I want to move on to like what material did you use? Now I know you mentioned earlier that you were studying for the PE first before you switched to the FE. So would you say that the material that you studied for the PE really helped you with the FE? And then on top of that, did you use any extra material for the FE?
Yes. So I did actually go through the School of PE program,
Okay.
and that had good and bad, mostly really great. There were a couple of the sections that I had trouble with how the whole thing was run. I did the on demand, I didn't do the live version because I could do it whenever I needed to. And I actually like that. And you didn't sit there, although, everybody, you had the little chat window on the side, if anybody's familiar with that, and people would get off topic and start chatting over there, and it would distract the whole thing. And I was like, what is wrong with these people? I just listen. And yeah, people really sort of derailed the learning process sometimes with that. So, but most of it was great. And they do move pretty quickly on a couple of those modules, but I got a lot out of it. But it was very PE oriented. And when you look at it, they're just kind of skimming the surface to get you familiar with the problems. And then, just like what you were saying, Kenza, you have to work the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can sit there and watch videos all day, but until you get so comfortable with exactly, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the FE reference manual here, until you knew where that was and how it was laid out in there, and that goes with your PE materials as well, it's just not going to work. You have to get really familiar with looking through the references to get to what it is you need for that problem. And so I started to really focus on problem solving in August and late July and August. And then, once I knew I was going to take the FE, I switched gears and really focused on FE style problems, which are different. Same material, same subjects, but the style of the problem is different. And I had to get to where I was so comfortable with that reference manual that I knew exactly where to go, what equation, because a lot of stuff you have to derive out of the FE. It's not just like broken down in PE materials. They'll say, "Oh, this little piece of this fraction is actually, that this is your unit weight right here or something." In the
Mm-hmm.
FE, that's not broken down for you. You have to figure that out yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's why the FE is in some ways, I believe, a little bit more difficult.
Hmm.
Maybe the problems aren't quite as in depth, but you don't have all that reference material.
I see.
And they don't give you as much time to solve 110 problems as the PE gives you. You have a 6 minute per problem average, and 3 minutes is not enough in the FE. I really, I mean, maybe you did, Kenza. You got maybe all 110. I ran out of time. We'll talk about that here in a minute, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
But back to the point is you had to become very familiar with the FE and FE style problems. And that was the difference is that I changed from going through school of PE, focusing on PE type problems to suddenly having to change. And it was a big change to change to FE style problems.
So for the FE exam, did you use like Linderbrook book or like what did you study off? What material
S-
did you use?
So that's a very good question. So yes, I did have, sorry, I'm gonna look through here. So I did have this
Okay.
the FE manual,
Okay.
and I was looking through it. I was very familiar with it because I got very familiar with my CERM, my CE reference manual.
I see.
um, I just thought that maybe a lot of this stuff in here, I mean, I would read through this a lot of times in the morning, and I did use it as a reference manual to look up how a lot of problems were solved because I got the old NCEES. I got those practice exams,
Mm-hmm.
and they were good, but some of them were kind of strange. So I kind of hacked through that a little bit until I
I see.
found your site, and then I started to get a little bit more direct focused on FE problems. And so to get more practice, I also got this book, and it's by these are initials MR Islam PhD and PE. This was a very good book. It had 2 tests, and he did a very good job breaking down the problems and solving them. It was very clear, and I learned a lot from this along with your videos, and that I think that that was what helped me the most. I have one more here somewhere, and I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Yeah, FE preparation, and it's from Anthem Books. So I got both of these off of Amazon.
I see.
And so these 2 were very good, and this is where I began to realize I'm gonna have to learn the SI unit
Yeah.
style of the problems. They had a good, blend of these 2. This one has a website, www.fepreps.com. These 2, books were great.
Did you
Um,
use the NCS practice exam as
I
well or no?
did. So I
You
did
did?
that as well.
Okay.
But that one, I seemed to work through it pretty fast. And then toward
Okay.
the end, I watched one of your videos to learn how to get some of the more of the reference material. And this particular exam that you provided, this one was the closest to the FE that I found
Exam.
from
Okay.
the one from Chaya, this mock
Great.
exam. That was a very good one too.
Great.
But it did show you how to solve the problems. This just let me know how close I was going to be on the
To
FE.
the
So I worked this in the week before the test. I worked this in the over the course of 2 days. So I said, okay, I'm going to work this. I'm going to give myself 2 days to do it, and I forced
yeah.
myself to finish it in 2 days.
Wow.
That was a good practice.
It's awesome.
Uh,
Did you take any practice exam? Like, did you sit before your exam? Did you sit for like 5 hours and you time yourself and you had like no distraction, just like mimicking the same
I
environment?
so yes, I took like 3 days off of work, and for 2 days I sat there. Well, and I have to admit, I didn't force myself to work it over the course of 6 hours. I said, well, you know what? If I can sit here for 3 hours in the morning and work on it, and then 3 hours in the afternoon, and then take a few minutes to make sure that I know how to do it. So I would go look up the reference manual real quick to make sure, I mean, or the Lindbergh manual to make sure I knew how to work the problem if I
Yeah,
struggled on it. So I said, I know that I can't do that on the test. So if I work 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, I know I can work that test that one day. So I didn't force myself to work 110 problems at once. I
I see.
worked like 55 problems one day, and then the next day I came back in and did 55 problems. But inside of that, if I struggled on something, I went and made sure I was like, oh, there it is. Because like statistics, I just, I had, it's been a long time since I've had that. And I was like, students T tests. Let me look that up real quickly. And so I would go back and actually read through it. And I was like, oh, yeah, there it is. And then I'd move on. I'd start up again.
I see. That's
Yeah.
great. It's like getting a little bit of clue. That way you remember like how to
Right.
solve it. Kind of it helps you to remember right away the problem, and then you move on to the next one.
Yeah. Throughout October, I started to work more and more problems each day. And so I started to notice is like, oh, here in the evening, I'm starting to work where before I would maybe get through 10 problems. I started to get through like 25 problems. And then as that, familiarity and confidence grew, I got to where I could work more problems in the same amount of time and started to look up less through my materials. And so you kind of start to build up and you're like, here's another trust problem. I know
Yeah,
exactly which way the moment is going to go. You start to become so familiar with it that you don't have to guess which way the moment is going or any, you just know exactly. And when you do all of those trust problems, and you know which section you need to cut through, where at first you're like, I have no idea how do I cut through this.
that's
and
true.
and then
Yeah,
after a while, you become, I know where I can do this because I
yeah,
know which point, I will get that and not have to solve as many equations, and you just get familiar with it. And there's
Yeah.
no way for anybody to describe it to you until you practice it a bunch of times.
Yeah. I think that's really engineering. The more you practice, the faster you get and the more confident you be, and then you start getting the problems. That's really just the only way I think you can do it. Now, was there a particular place you like to study? Like did you study in a cafe or library, maybe at work?
I got pretty good at being able to filter out distractions. I
Okay.
oddly at my own desk at work was almost one of the worst places to study it. I could do it, if I stayed there like for another hour after work, but the problem is I have work sitting there all the, and I seem to be perpetually behind. So, I was kind of mixing things up a little bit too much right there at my desk. I did do some of it. Not everybody coming out of college has an office at work yet, but the local library had all these little study rooms, and that was my favorite place. I
Okay.
can't study in cafes and stuff like that. I never was, even in college. I couldn't do that. I had to go to a library. I do like to put on like my headphones and listen to like classical music, and no one can be singing. But as long as it was just music, like classical music, and I'm not a big, huge classical music fan, but old style classical music really does actually help, I think. And if you get used to having it, there's definitely kind of a your brain kind of gets into the study mode if you listen to. And there was actually one of a playlist that was like classical music for studying, and so I found
Yeah.
that on Spotify, and I liked it, and it did help me, kept me entertained while was going through this. And so I don't know, it worked for me. Maybe try it.
When I was studying for the FE exam, like I like, or even when I'm working, or even now when I'm studying, I like to listen to music. But if I need like really my focus, like I can't have music with lyrics because that can distract me and I start
Yeah,
singing
there's
and then
no
I'm
lyrics.
off. So music with no lyrics really helps. Yeah, and I don't like to work in cafes either because it gets loud. Although sometimes when I'm not motivated, so for some reason working in a cafe for just like a half hour, an hour gives me that motivation, and when I get home, I'm like motivated to go.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I have to agree with you there. Sometimes you could go there, it's like, you know what, I'm just gonna open this up, kind of start reviewing it, and
Yeah.
have a cup of coffee real quick, and and then you're like, okay, now I'm kind of in the mood now.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're not in the mood and you had to
That's true.
find that. So in
Yeah.
that respect, I do think that that works. But
Yeah.
I live in a smaller town here, so our like local coffee shops are right in downtown, and our library's just right across the street. So
Yeah.
that kind of worked.
I know you said that you had your master's in construction management, right?
Yeah, that's
And
correct. Yeah.
did you feel like your classes prepared you for the FE exam?
That I was surprised at how quickly the math came back. I mean, of course, I like I said, I was always a lifelong. I like to learn. It's not like I don't apply a lot of that at work. I mean, we had to do, especially hydraulics because I work for a utility company. So, we do a lot of closed conduit hydraulics, and we own a reservoir up in a canyon that's suffering. We had a forest fire, so I had to do all the watershed analysis for it. It's like I did do some of that at work, but I have an applied math degree, so the math part was great, and the statistics stuff I am familiar with. I just don't use it very often. I will say that the FE does have quite a lot of statistics. I was sort of surprised. I didn't think there would be that many problems. I thought maybe there'd be a couple, and they combined problems. Like they combined statistics um,
Engineering econ?
with the econ. Yeah,
Yeah,
there was
I
statistics
heard
mixed
that.
in with the econ. Yeah,
Yeah.
and those were some pretty tough questions. They
Yeah.
had some double variable best fit type problems, and I have to admit I
Yeah.
saw that and I skipped it because I knew even if could focus on doing, I was like, oh, that's actually a really long problem, even if you know what you're doing right away. Working it on your calculator. Oh, that's another thing. Be sure you get very familiar with how to work all that stuff on your calculator. It saves a lot of time. But going back to the original question, I did feel like my undergrad helped me with that. Now, my master's degree helped me a lot with construction management. And I did try to take where I could more technical electives as part of the program. So I had a soils and foundations
Great.
class. I had a lab, a construction materials class,
Okay.
and there were some things in there that I was like, "Ooh, that I directly know that from my master's program." So, the construction management part, like scheduling, project scheduling, ethics, things like that, that helped me. So those, and those problems are on there. That helped me a lot. Mhm.
That's great. What about like statics, fluid mechanics, dynamics?
So dynamics I had
Okay.
in undergrad, but I never took a mechanics of materials. I never took
Yeah.
I did take a construction materials and then of course the graduate class with the construction materials testing class. So I became familiar with it. One of the things I really had to sort of teach myself was like the Moore circle for stress and shear. I always would see that and I was like, I really don't know what that's doing. Then once I focused on learning it, it became more clear. So a lot of that was self-taught, I would say, but
Wow.
I went and got textbooks and I worked textbook problems. So I've been doing that now for like the
Yeah.
last 6 or 7 years where I was actually self-teaching by going back and getting textbooks off of Amazon and working through them. And I did that with traffic because I never had a traffic and highway design class. I never did that. I never took a formal mechanics and materials class.
What about
Lot of
concrete
that
and steel?
structural stuff,
No.
I had to
Wow.
teach myself. Yeah.
Wow, that's really impressive. Because so you taught yourself all this, and
Mhm.
then you took your FE exam. So now, since we're already on the topic, when you're gonna take your PE, do you like what discipline are you gonna take?
Probably construction,
Okay,
although now I realize that probably my strength lies in water resources.
I was
Um,
gonna say
and
that
yeah,
because
I
yeah,
may actually change, but I've done so much studying for construction and
mhm,
I do a lot of construction. I mean, I manage big construction projects. So when I see how much earth a bucket, picks up and how much time, all of that kind of stuff is
that's
just in
true.
my head. So in that respect, I might stick with construction, but I really like the water resources and the water problems are great. Currently managing a project to rebuild a wastewater treatment plant. And so I'm having to get really familiar with the chemistry and biology of wastewater treatment. The environmental part is what has maybe kept me from doing that on the
I
PE,
see.
but maybe I'd want to change.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff that you do at work is close to the PE for like water and
Yes. Yeah,
hydrology
we
for
do.
sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, now I was hoping if we could discuss some techniques that you found effective. Now, are there any study habits that you found not to be effective?
Probably, I know a lot of people maybe spend too much time watching videos. That probably isn't helpful. There's a diminishing return to just sitting there and watching YouTube for too long. And I think you stress that in all of your videos that it's like, guys, go start working the problem as you do the videos. And the
Yeah.
videos are there to sort of get your mind thinking and see how it would work. And then you really just have to work it. Maybe at first you would do a lot more video, a lot more reading. And then as you get more and more familiar, you'll transition to doing more problems. And that's the whole philosophy behind doing this over a much longer period rather than cramming it all in. I don't think that's a good strategy at all.
I agree. I mean, that might work with some people because I know like a couple students who literally studied for 2 weeks and they took the FE exam and they passed. But the majority of us, they need a little bit of time to study and prepare for the FE exam. And just to prepare yourself mentally that you're going to take this exam in like 2 months or in a month. And it's really
Mhm.
important to leave that enough time for yourself to get ready. Yeah.
It's probably a rare thing that somebody could cram for only 2 weeks and do it, unless they were probably strong students to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Or they just
I
graduated
right.
recently.
I know people who take a full like semester class to prepare you for FE style problems, and then it's like, okay, now you need to spend this much time getting, and then some people will be like, I'm ready to just go do it now.
So now to go back to your comment on the videos, that's true. I do agree with what you said. You should take the problem like on the videos as like if you get stuck, that's a video that helps you walk you through it. When you see problems, because the problems that I post and a lot of people that post are problems that are on the FE exam, and it's good that you get yourself familiar with them and look at those problems. but
Mhm.
try not to just watch the whole solution. Like try to attempt them, and
Right.
right before you can see the solution, because that's the
Right.
best way to learn it is by trying and attempting it.
Yeah, if I was somewhere where I was able to start the problem with you, I would do that, and then I would hit pause. And once I was like, oh, now I know where we're going with this. I'd hit pause and see if I could work it out right there while I was kind of following along, writing it down. And exactly, I would try to see if I could get ahead of you. And then if I got stuck, I'd just hit the space bar and watch the
Yes,
rest.
that's really great approach. Okay, now what would you have done differently? Like, was there anything specifically that you wished maybe spend more time on a specific topic, or you would have just spend more time studying for the FE? Or was there a material that you wished like that you didn't even cover because it wasn't very relevant to the FE exam?
No, I saw the pattern, I
Yeah.
watched your videos, I looked through the probably if anything, I would have not spent so much time in the very beginning trying to hack through the Lindbergh FE manual because I think that that book is just too intimidating. It's there to go and get some background and read it. I don't think that trying to work the problems in the back of those they're kind of cryptically stated sometimes. Like if say there's 10 problems, probably 2 of them are indicative of the type that you would get on the FE exam. And if you could get those 2, then you're probably good and move on. But I think I stressed myself out in the beginning trying to think that I had to be a master of all of that stuff and it wasn't necessary. And I didn't really need to study things that are more in the mechanical realm. Like I think I was really worried that there was going to be like a thermodynamics type question on there, and I think I spent a little bit too much time on some chemistry stuff to get
Yeah.
caught up. But other than that, not really. I think I put myself on a pretty good even, steady program where I just did a bit every day and didn't get burnt out too much. And yeah, I think I did it the way I would suggest everybody do it. And I have a couple of guys at work who are kind of in the same boat. They have engineering degrees. So now I'm like, hey, if you do this the way I did it, I think you can do it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
You're
Mhm.
inspiring them. That's really awesome. Yeah, no, I totally agree with the Linderbrook book. It can be heavy, especially like if you start with like the review manual. So there is the review manual for civil. So what you have is you have the FE review manual for other disciplines, and that's why it has the thermodynamics and stuff that you don't need for civil. But he also has one for civil, and that one covers only the civil topics. But I
Oh,
do.
see, that would be better.
Yeah, so and there's also another one that is smaller one that has only problems for civil practice problems. So I found this one was more helpful than the big one. I think the review manual, like you said, at first it was intimidating and it was a little bit stressful. Like when I looked at it, I was like, wow, I need to learn all this information. And he
Yeah.
goes depth into concept, and it can be like boring sometimes. But like you said, I think using it as a way of like if you are solving a problem or you're in a topic and you got stuck, I think it's great to go back to this book and reference to it. But to study off of this one can be sometimes hard and can be hard to motivate yourself to study to
Yeah.
begin with. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
you'd lose motivation just getting so
Yeah,
intimidated. It was like,
yeah,
"What's the point? I can't." And
yeah,
what I would tell everybody to do is start getting prepared for the PE. Don't let time go by. Start working on the PE right away. Even if you're thinking about the FE, it doesn't hurt to start getting ready. If you have start getting used to looking things up in the
yeah,
CERM and start putting the tabs on there because I had done that when I would run into something in the FE my course of studying for the FE and it was good practice. I relative compaction, concrete mix, and I would go right to my tabs and there it was. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember tabbing that. And I think it helped to already have a familiarity with the CERM. It helped my FE studies a lot. Of course,
yeah,
a lot of those problems are in imperial English units. There aren't that many in the SI units, so
yeah.
that's a difference.
Okay. Was there anything specific that you did that helped you stay motivated while studying for the FE exam? I know we covered this a little bit. You said like you try to stay active, eating healthy, having that
Mhm.
balanced life when you are about to burn out, you spend time with your family. You think that really helped you kind of stay motivated?
It did, and to add to that, I kept there's a saying, "Keep your eye on the prize," and you think about
Yeah.
just think about what this will be for you and this is what you've, put yourself through, 4 or 5, 6 years of college to do. It's like, if you just, for a relatively short time of your life, really buckle down, and after a couple of weeks, you get into a groove. It's not as hard. It's hard that first week maybe, but
Yeah.
once you start to develop a routine and the habits, it gets easier and easier. And knowing that you are going to accomplish that goal is a big motivator. And you just have to keep that there, focused on what it's going to do for you and how it's going to make you feel. You'll there's a difference between just having gone to college and then actually accomplishing this goal, keeping that, at the tip of your brain. And then for me, it's also thinking about, once all of us kind of get older, start having a career and kids, you start to do this as much for your family as you would for you. And so maybe for me, that helped a lot because maybe when I was younger, I didn't think of it, it wasn't as important for me back then as it is now. As you go through your career, you'll start to realize how important it is to go through these. That's what engineers have to do.
So looking at like how your life will be after you pass the FE exam, the kind of confidence it gives you, like you said, having a degree is different than being in EIT. And then again, it's going to take you to another step once you take your PE, and then your career just, you further your career, which is like that would be great motivation to think
Absolutely,
of.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so I was hoping we could like explore the day before you took your FE exam. Were you feeling ready? Like, did you feel
I,
stressed?
No, not really. I felt like I was like, it's kind of like, what happens during a really tough semester in college. You had all this homework, you had all this stuff going on, and suddenly it was like you've had to do all that hard work for getting ready for the final exam. But then, like when it's there, you're like suddenly, well, there's nothing else I can do. I mean,
Yeah,
now I just got to go in there and sit and do it, and so that's kind of where I was. I was like, there's not much else I can do. And so now I feel like I understand most of it. And I kind of de stressed myself that day before. I went for a mountain bike ride. I live in Los Alamos here in New Mexico, and I had to go all the way to Albuquerque to take the test. So I decided I'd stay there overnight, not drive down, have to get up super early and do that so that I got a good night's sleep. So that, that's something that I had to be prepared for, but that, it wasn't too bad. But yeah, I went for a mountain bike ride and kind of just relieved my stress level a little
yeah,
bit to so that I didn't, and I kind of just purposely didn't think about it. It was amazing. I felt less stressed then than I did like 2 or 3 weeks before because it was
yeah,
done. Now it was just one thing I did have to think about was a strategy. You only get a certain amount of time and the clock keeps ticking if you get up, and you only have that 20 to 25 minutes break in the middle. And so I said, well, I'm not going to drink a whole bunch of coffee and water beforehand, so I don't
yeah,
want to have to be getting up and lose time because I already did the kind of time myself, and I was like, it's going to be tight.
yeah.
Finish that many problems. So I was a little nervous about how my body would withstand that. But in the end, it was pretty, like I said, I stayed in shape. I ate well. On purpose, I don't eat a lot of sugar and stuff so that I don't feel addicted to sugar because you don't get to have all that in there with you. Yeah, it's good to wean yourself off of that. If you're used to drinking like Monster energy drinks and Red Bulls, get to where you don't have to have those because you don't get to have them in the test.
I think I can totally relate to all everything pretty much you mentioned. The day before the FE exam, my test, I went for a run in nature, and that really helped me
Yeah.
calm down. Tried not to drink a lot of water or coffee in the morning, so that way I don't have to take breaks during the exam. And I made sure to have no sugar or like at least very little sugar. I already don't eat a lot of sugar in my diet in general because you can easily crash and that can affect your
Yeah.
productivity. So I was very aware of that, especially during the FE exam. So yeah, those were all great tips.
I think it's really important. I mean, maybe this isn't for everybody, but in general, I mean, being an engineer is a tough occupation. And so there's going to be a lot of demands, and having a clear mind is always part of at least my job. I have to have, mental clarity. And I notice people around me who don't have it, and it's like they feel stressed out or they are having trouble figuring this thing out. And it's like, I'm like, just go for a walk. Like once you get into good habits, not only for the test but for your whole career and your life. I mean, you have to do that because it's already tough enough to get through a day of being an engineer. So there are some days that are like the FE, I have to admit. So it's a good habit, but the sugar thing is a problem.
Yeah,
If you have to do that, because I think I have pretty good endurance for things like that, and I have to say that last hour when some of the toughest problems hit me, I had to sit there and like, you know, sort of double up my effort and get down to business. And it was like, ooh, that's a tough problem. And you've already worked like 80 problems. And all of a sudden a big geotechnical problem was staring you down. It was like you really had to buckle down and do that. Yeah.
that's true. I have no idea why
Go ahead.
I have no idea why like they have the tough problems at the end of the exam. Like all the heavy tough problems are at the end, and by that time you're already tired, you already want to be done with the exam, and then you get like a long question and you're like, like you said, you really have to take a moment and just be like, okay, I have to power through. I am almost done with this test and just, kind of just go for it.
So we probably should talk about this because I didn't really think about it. I did come up with a strategy that I knew that structural steel problems were probably not my strongest point. I mean, I was comfortable with them. I mean, I was like, if they give me a standard problem, I'll have no problem solving it. I understand what all of these are, those Z tables, all of your length parameters and everything. It was all there, but they could ask those questions in so many different ways
That's true.
that even if you're pretty comfortable with it, it's going to take you a while to get through. So I told myself, I'm not going to let myself get bogged down in structural steel or even structural concrete problems because those are the longest problems. I'm very comfortable with geotechnical problems, but that the same thing. They could throw a really long problem at you. And that happened in the last hour of the test, and I would say hour and a half of the test. There was a really tough moment there where I was like, "Uh-oh, I'm running out of time." And I had let myself they lobbed a couple of easy structural problems at me. I started working them, and then I started working the third one, and it was a long one, and it took way too much time. I probably spent 10 minutes on a single problem, maybe not that much, but close. And I really wish I didn't do that because I knew I could finish the geotechnical problems, but I spent too much time on the structural problems, and then I didn't have enough time to work relatively easy geotechnical and traffic engineering problems. And so I had to skip to the end of the test when I saw that I only had 35 minutes left and I had this many problems left. And I said, I knew toward the end would be the construction management problems like
Hmm.
scheduling and stuff like that. And so I
Yeah,
did. I went through and I scrolled through. I found like, oh, there's an easy problem. Scrolled through, found another easy problem, and then I went to question number 110 and started working my way backwards
I see.
with 35 minutes to go. And I think by the end, I maybe had 10 problems that I didn't really get to. And it was a bummer because they were problems I was like, I could totally work that one. Okay. But I had like 2 minutes left. Keep that in mind.
Yeah,
The test gets harder toward the end,
that's true.
and you have to come up with a strategy when you start to run out of time.
I like how you said going to 110 and then work yourself towards
Mhm.
like backwards because at the end you have surveying, you have construction, and those are usually short, quick
Yeah,
answers.
they were short. Right.
Yeah, and then maybe like you said, if concrete, you get concrete because sometimes like in my exam, the concrete question was very quick. It was like one step kind of thing, just get the equation and solve. I had like a singly reinforced concrete beam. It was really easy. So if you do get a long structural question, just skip it, flag it, and move on, come back to it later. I do
Right.
have a lot of students who's been getting a lot of long transportation questions. And so that one goes the same way. If you get a long question, skip it and go to the questions that you know. So that way you know them for sure and then come back to those later.
Right. I
Yes.
had a transportation problem rolled into one of the computer programming problems, and
Wow.
I was like, "Wow, that is a tough problem." That one was a long one, but it had a little tiny loophole in it, and I won't talk about get into it, but if you really look at it, sometimes you'll find that it's like you can rule out which ones are not it. And so by a
Yeah.
process of elimination, I was able to find the right answer to that one. But
Wow.
anyway.
Did you get that question in the morning or in the afternoon?
That one was in the morning. That was in the
Yeah.
or it was early, it was in part of the computer programming. So I flagged it and moved on. And then right before I took my break, I went back to it. One little thing kinda went through my head. I was like, "You know what? I bet you it's," and so I just ruled out which 3 it cannot be, and then sure enough, I think, yeah, that
Okay.
one.
Wow. That's really interesting. Did you track the time?
Not
Like,
really.
not
Mm-mm.
really?
No,
Okay.
I just didn't wanna even have that. I just knew I needed to move on, and to be honest, there was a lot of times where and I started thinking about this as I did the practice tests, that a lot of times like, you start working a problem, you're like, "Oh, this is definitely intention," and so you right away, you can rule out the 2 compression ones, and then as you work through it, you're like, "One of the values was way out of range," and
I
you're like,
see.
"Oh, we're not looking at numbers like that, we're looking at numbers like this." And so you can even stop that problem and just it's got to be this one and move on.
I see.
Don't work the whole problem out. Once it's like we're not looking at things in that 10 to the sixth, kilo new. It's like
Yeah.
something way small. And yeah, so I definitely did that quite a bit. By
Okay.
the day of the test, there were some times didn't even look through the FE reference handbook because it was like a lot of it was kind of hidden in there, and you could move on without having to look it up.
Okay.
Um,
Was it like conceptual questions or was it practical
There
questions?
were a lot of conceptual questions, but they were just they were like calculations that it's like, I think they provided everything kinda right here,
I see.
and I would get through. Definitely with, like, trusses and beams. There's
I see.
in the
Yeah,
reference man in there that's gonna help you, so if,
that's
you
true.
know, like, you realize it's like, "Man, the stuff they give you in this reference manual wasn't helpful for trusses and beams." Yeah, and they were determining whether it's statically determinate or indeterminate and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Those were
Mhm.
in there a lot, yeah.
Okay, I do have a couple of videos on that, so make sure you guys watch those problems. Okay, and now, how many hours did you spend on the first half and versus the second half?
I thought I was really on time on the first one. I
Okay.
think I spent I think I came in actually just a little bit under 3 hours for the first half, and I thought,
Okay.
"Oh, I've got this thing," but the second half takes more time. I would say by 30 to 40 minutes, the second half is longer, but don't let that freak
Yeah.
you out, because I think everybody probably gets more of the questions, and I think you could probably pass the test with doing a good job in the morning and just getting a few in the afternoon. I think that kind of works out how it is, but I be ready for the whole test. That's
Yeah.
all I can say is, yeah, don't skip any subjects, but have a strategy of things you're going to skip.
So I usually do suggest to my student to spend about 2 hours and 15 minutes to 20 minutes in the first session in the morning. So that
Hmm.
way you have more time for the afternoon session.
Right,
So
right,
so that way you have like 3 hours in the afternoon session.
right.
But like you said, if you have really your strength is in the morning questions, and like you said, they're shorter, they're sometimes easier than the afternoon session. And if you do really well on the first session, you might be able to do well on the whole exam.
Yeah.
But
ex-
it is important to study all the topics. I definitely agree with that, just like you mentioned. So, how many questions did you have to guess? And do you have a guessing strategy? I mean, you did mention like that you do an educated guess, but let's say you had a problem where you had no idea what it was hard to do an educated guess. Did you have a strategy for that?
Yeah, I did have to just go through, and I think, like I said, it was like 10 or 12 problems. I think one or two of them, I was like, is this has to be in this sort of range. And so I gave an educated guess for like two of them, and then the rest of them, I just picked B. I was just
Okay.
like, because I was really out of time. And like I said, I was like, I think it's the dimensions have to be right about here. And so I
Yeah.
did that in a couple of those, and then the rest of it I just ran out of time.
So you
Yeah.
picked the letter B, and then you whenever you don't know, you just
Yeah,
guess B.
and maybe it was 8 in total. It was 8, but they were the bummer thing was it was like a, geometry of a horizontal curve or something. It was something that was gonna be pretty easy because you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, if let's work through here." You'll calculate the station based on the curve length, and, it's like,
yeah,
those are not that hard to work out, and I had to guess on which was a bummer. But I
yeah.
kinda guessed based on kinda what they gave me. I was like, "It has to be right around there." But you never know.
Okay, so were you feeling confident when you finished the exam?
I was actually. I walked out and I said, "You know what? I think I did okay." I wasn't stressed out about having to guess because I knew that, you probably weren't going to finish. And I'd read a couple of things and stuff that people were like, "Yeah, I guessed on like 25 and I still passed."
Oh, wow.
So I wasn't too stressed out about that.
Okay, cool. Are there any areas that were difficult that you wish you would have studied more?
I was pretty prepared for all of it. Like I said, the structural steel problems, you really have to work a lot of those problems because those have so many dimensions. And then especially like with the concrete, you have to sometimes work 2 or 3 problems to find out what it's like. If it's within this range, then you work this problem. If it's within this range, then you work this problem. So I spent a lot of time on those,
I
and I
see.
probably should have just skipped it and then come back to it.
Knowing those topics really well, doing a lot of problems can also help sometimes to work them faster. And even if they throw something at you, you'll be able to kind of figure it out. Uh,
I would say everybody needs to understand exactly like what's the difference if you're working a problem in shear, or if you're working a problem, if it's like compression or shear or tent. You need to understand those phi factor equivalents for each type of stress state. That's important to understand because they do test you. There were quite a few conceptual problems as well as quantitative problems.
So in concrete and steel, just moment itself, you have if you can apply that for shear and compressive strength, that you have the design, you have the demand, and you have the factored moment. And you have
Mhm.
to know the difference between all those three because if the question asks for design, you can't give them factored moment or demand moment. And
That's
so
right.
yes, and that's
Oh, yeah, clear. They really tested you
yeah.
whether you understood nominal, ultimate, factored.
Yes. Yeah.
That was very important to understand as
Are there any concepts or topics that stuck out to you?
that just there were a lot of truss and beam analysis. I mean, you had to understand your shear and moment diagrams.
Okay.
They made you calculate them. Plus, they would give you some pretty hard conceptual, like where they would introduce the moment. They'd put a moment on different places, and that you really had to understand what was going on those conceptual problems. They were tough. Let's see. So that stuck out.
I
They
see.
gave some pretty difficult truss type problems where you had to find out what the stress was in like a diagonal member. There were a couple of those. Let's see. And then the structural stuff is pretty heavy. The structural and geotechnical, it was pretty heavy. So I would say that zone right there between like problem 78 through 95, somewhere in there, it was a very hard part of the test. Yeah.
Okay, that's really good to keep in mind in terms of planning and timing yourself. Yeah.
Right.
Are there any topics that were easier than you expected?
The vectors, the math, the vector stuff, I didn't think that those were too bad, but
Okay.
really be aware that you understand what your unit normal vector is, like scalar and cross product type stuff. Make sure you're really comfortable with that because there are quite a number of those. But if you're, pretty clear on that, which doesn't take too long, if even if you weren't that good at it in college, it doesn't take long to get familiar enough, and your calculator can do so much of it.
Yeah,
So that
that's
part
true.
went better than I thought.
Okay.
Yeah, like they gave me a differential equation, but it was like find the characteristic equation. So that's almost a gimme.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
I do have a problem on that on my YouTube. So, and a lot of people freak out because differential equations is not on the FE Civil. It's not shown on the specifications. but it's only that part that
Mhm.
really they ask on differential equations. So you don't really need to know differential equation
No,
except
I
that
don't
portion.
mm-mm.
Yeah.
Give me a partial derivative problem
Yes.
too, and that one and it was unfortunately with trig functions, but
Okay.
if you're just kind of familiar with it, you'll get it. But
Okay.
that yeah,
Yeah.
so and then you had to rearrange oh, that's another thing. Be sure you're good at rearranging because sometimes they'll all your sines and cosines, they'll suddenly convert it into like, into a tangent or something. So it almost looks like the answer's not there. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this is one minus, and yeah, so you have to be good with those identities. Yeah, so
Yeah.
there was some of that. So, but
That makes
as long
sense.
as you yeah are quick on recognizing that they just rearranged an identity.
Yeah.
There's yeah,
That can be tricky, especially under that time pressure of the exam.
exactly
But
right.
so, which sections had a large amount of conceptual questions?
I was surprised at how many mechanics of materials conceptual questions there were. There were a lot of moment and sheer conceptual questions.
Okay.
And then they threw in there material science too. So like I had a problem that was really pretty tough because it was a mixture of the two. And so you had to know what the properties of steel are and what happened, so be able to work those material property questions as well as a mechanics of materials. So, oh, strain and stress, there was a lot of that. Where
Okay.
you really had to rearrange the whole equation to get to, okay, I had to calculate the strain and here's the stress and then I had to do a lot of like equation gymnastics to get to what it was they were asking. Oh, and one other thing I meant to bring this up earlier. They really tricked you with giving you a problem that was always in PSI or KSI, and then at the very end of it said, "What is this closest to in kips per foot or pounds per square foot?" And I would work through it, and I'd be like, "I am not even close. Where did I go wrong?" And I'd go through and I would rework the problem, and
Oh,
then reread the problem statement. If you come out with an answer that's not even close, reread to see which dimension they're asking you because I did that. I think I made that mistake 3 times, and that cost me a lot of time
wow.
rework.
Watch out for the units. That's the thing.
Yes.
I would always emphasize on this on my
Yep.
videos. Be careful and read the question very carefully and
Mhm.
check the units. See what units you have and what units you need to give the answer in. So that's
Yep.
really important.
And they did give the dynamics questions, with the like projectiles and momentum equations. There were some pretty hard ones that they did not throw softballs on those. Um, they would give it to you, and okay, it was shot from the from this mountain, and then it hit so you had to. It wasn't going from zero, like
Yeah,
position zero. It was going from some other height
elevation.
and it was abbreviated somewhere in the path, and so be prepared for tricky versions of those, not just straight plug and chug into those projectile motion equations. You had to and angular momentum. There were a lot of those too, and so I did practice dynamics a lot
Okay.
beforehand, and so I think and there's like 10 solidly tough dynamics questions.
Okay.
I was a little shocked at that too, where I was like, "Uh-oh, that's an omega problem," and it
Yeah.
wasn't just straightforward motion. So,
You had some tough questions in your exam.
and yeah, every once in a while there was like, oh, relief, 2 or 3 easier, quicker, but then they would throw something new and big at you. Yeah, so I think they do that. Like 3 out of 10 would be pretty easy, and then all of a sudden they would go back to giving you pretty tough ones. Yeah.
Let's discuss a little bit geotechnical engineering. It's just because we get a lot of questions on geotech. If you could just tell us, just like in general, like what are the topics that you had in your exam?
I think the geotechnical I saw, of course, like I said, I kind of ran out of time. Phase relationships was very, very. If you really got to be comfortable, and you
Yeah,
worked out a lot of those, and you're like, in this part of this fraction is actually this value, like
yeah,
here's your void number right here. You have to be good at that, at
yeah.
being able to extract that value out of the problem because that was in there. And so phase relationships were mainly it. And then I think there was like a consolidation over time. How much of a consolidation percentage versus time? There was one of those. So you had to do both time and the consolidation ratio was in there. And then a flow net problem was in there. Yeah. So but I would say if you're comfortable with phase relationship, you'd be okay.
The last topic I would like to go over is environmental. A lot of students really struggle with this topic just because it's really heavy on conceptual. And I'm not sure how well Linderberg explains it or like the resources out there. So if you could just broadly again just tell us a little bit what kind of questions you had on that
Yeah,
topics.
I had a few BOD questions, and
Okay.
it was like, where streams come in together, and they would give you a BOD and a flow immediately after what is the BOD. So you had to use that. You have to be able to calculate your BOD level in a couple of different ways. Oh, retention pond time. Every way that they could ask you a biochemical oxygen demand know that pretty well because
Okay.
they did hit, and I would say that there was like 4 or 5 problems like that, and they weren't all conceptual. You actually had to calculate it out.
I
Mhm.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe there was one out of the 5 was conceptual, but yeah, it was pretty tough.
Okay. I actually had a couple conceptual questions on my exam on environmental. The
Mhm.
only two areas where I had conceptual questions was environmental and transportation. Everything
Oh,
else was just
no.
works problems.
Every subject had a conceptual.
Conceptual.
Every subject, every single one had a
Yeah, I
yeah.
think now they have a lot more conceptual questions, and I did post a video on this a couple weeks ago.
I saw that
Yeah,
video before I day 2 days before I saw that video, and I was like,
yeah.
"Oh, okay." I had actually, I think, 2 fill in the blank
Okay.
questions where I actually had to fill in the blank, and then I had some graphical ones, and then I had some where you had to choose. They gave me a list of answers, and it wasn't matching numbers, so you had to go and grab out of, like, 20 terms, you had to grab 5. That was like, "Ah."
I actually had a couple like formats like that. So the FE exam format did change recently, I think 2017. And now they don't only have multiple choice, they have
Mhm.
filling in the blank, the matching, or like a click on the graph where you think it's the right
Yes.
answer.
Right.
Or like
Mhm.
you said, I had that thing where I had to drag five answers, only the five answers, and match it. So yeah, I had similar. Good question. Yeah. Okay. So now, lastly, I was hoping we could talk about your life after passing the exam. I know we talked about this a little bit. Did passing the FE impact your professional life?
It I'm pretty far along. I'm not that far away from retiring actually, but because I have little kids, I'll probably keep working. And because, I live in a smaller town, not near a city, maybe I'd want to become a teacher or something.
Okay.
It's very fulfilling. It's very
Yeah.
satisfying, even on a personal level. But yeah, it's going to help my professional life eventually, especially, I've just got to go through letting up my state board let me take the PE exam. But then, and if for some reason I think now, because once I told them, I said, by the way, I passed the FE. Here's it. All of a sudden, they took this whole thing seriously. I'm not just somebody trying to exploit a loophole, because that happens. People
Yeah.
try to buck the system and
That's
try to
true.
become a PE, and I think that's why some states are changing their laws a little bit. But taking the FE, all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, that's a commitment." It shows a
Yeah.
level of commitment, and all of a sudden the conversation got much more serious. I had a conversation just yesterday with the executive director of our licensure board here in the state, and he, along with my references, some of whom he knows, and the fact that I took and passed the FE, a lot of engineers skip the FE because it's hard. And but I would say do not skip it. Go ahead and take it, and where you are. And you get to take the FE as many times as you want. And
That's true.
it's easier. You don't have all that overhead to take it. So you know
Yeah.
where you are right away, once you take it. Now I'm completely confident that the PE is within my realm.
Definitely helps you in like we discussed earlier. It's not only about having your degree, this is a little bit different because
Mm,
it's not an exam that was made by your professors. This was made like it's a national exam. Many students take it, and when you take it and you pass, you just go like, I think I'm close to being an engineer. Like really, this test
yeah,
kind of proves that I was
exactly.
able
Right.
to solve some really tough engineering problems, and that is really fulfilling, and it does really help with your confidence. Okay, so now, do you have any closing remarks for engineers who are trying to take their FE exam?
I would say take the time to study everything fully. Don't cram. Not only because, I mean, maybe it will help you to pass the test, but I don't think it helps you in the long run. Take the time to study everything, find the discipline it takes to do it over the course of several months rather than just, I mean, unless you are coming right out of school. I mean, that's a little bit different, but if it's been a little bit of time, take the time to do it. I highly suggest, sticking with Kenza's program, watching the video a day, doing the problems as she does them, and then going and buy a bunch of these practice exams like I did and work the problems. So that's it. I mean, because as you do that, and some of them, I was like, oh, this is a good problem. This person really designed this problem well, where I had to go look it up, and it was tricky, and it made me learn so much better than if I, just was working the easy ones. So, you know, that's it. Working the problems, finding a lot of different sources for problems, and the videos help supplement, but they're not everything.
That's true. I totally agree with that. Well, thank you so much. That was very inspiring. And thank you again, Clay, for being with us here today. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview. Clay has shared some amazing insights with us today that will help you study for your FE exam. Now, make sure you guys stay active and try to eat healthy because those two are really important and can affect your performance and can help you process information much faster. Now, if you lack motivation, which is totally normal because this test can be overwhelming and stressful. So, if you are in that situation, make sure you get out of it. Try to go to a place where it can help you start studying for your test. Either that is a cafe or library, and whatever works for you. Lastly, make sure you don't burn out. Make sure you take breaks from time to time because burnout can lead to depression, sadness, and lack of motivation, and you don't really want to be in that place. So make sure you take some time off, spend some time with family, friends, maybe go to nature. So it's really important to kind of have that balance. Clay has shared some books with us that helped him study for his FE exam. If you guys are interested, I will leave the link in the description below. Don't forget to sign up for some practice problems and cheat sheets on my website. If you are interested in the FE exam prep course, check the link in the description below. If you guys like this video, please give me a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe for new videos every Tuesday and Friday. Stay tuned for more videos like this. We're going to have a lot of students sharing their experience with us. Thank you guys for watching and have a productive weekend, and I will see you next week. À la prochaine. Oh yeah, everybody now.